You were taught to be good, to keep your hands clean, your voice low, your anger buried. You were told that conflict is failure, that the highest virtue is to bend, to yield, to never disturb the fragile peace. But what if peace itself is the illusion? What if the very act of swallowing your rage, of dulling your claws, is what keeps the wheel of war turning? There is a lie we've been fed since the first fires of civilization. That war is an aberration, a breakdown of order. But look closer. War is not the exception. It is the shadow that walks beside us, the uninvited guest at every feast, the whisper beneath every treaty. Why do we keep returning to it, century after century, as if pulled by some unseen gravity? Why does the blood-stained earth call to us, even as we swear we want nothing more than to turn away? The answer is not in the battlefield, but in the mind. War is not just about territory or power. It is about the human psyche, the unspoken hunger for meaning, for dominance, for the raw, unfiltered truth of existence. We fight because we are afraid of disappearing, of being forgotten, of losing the fragile constructs that tell us who we are. Strip away the flags, the ideologies, the grand speeches, and what remains? A primal scream against the void. But there is another layer, deeper still. War is not just destruction, it is creation. Every conflict rewrites the world, reshapes identities, forges new myths. The sword does not only cut, it carves the future. And so we must ask, is war a failure of humanity, or is it something far more terrifying? Is it necessary? War is not an external force that descends upon us. It is an emanation, a mirror held up to the darkest and brightest corners of the human soul. To understand why we fight, we must first confront the paradox that violence is not merely destructive but also generative, not just chaos but also order in its most brutal form. The battlefield is not separate from society. It is society distilled to its rawest essence, where all pretense of civility falls away, and what remains is the unvarnished truth of who we are. At its core, war is about belonging. We fight because we are bound to something, a tribe, an idea, a memory, and that binding is stronger than the fear of death. The soldier does not charge into gunfire for abstract ideals alone. He does it because, in that moment, the alternative, betrayal, exile, the erasure of his people, is a fate worse than annihilation. This is why war persists, because the human mind cannot endure meaninglessness. When all other narratives fail, war provides the ultimate story, one of heroes and villains, sacrifice and glory, a reason to exist etched in blood. Yet there is another force at work, one that operates in the shadows of our consciousness, the need for hierarchy. Conflict is the engine of dominance, the testing ground where power is proven, not granted. We pretend that civilization has tamed this impulse, that laws and diplomacy have rendered the old ways obsolete. But look at the corporate boardroom, the political arena, even the quiet wars of social status. They are all battlefields in disguise. The human mind craves the clarity of victory and defeat, even as it professes to despise them. And then there is the most unsettling truth of all. War is seductive. It simplifies. In a world drowning in ambiguity, war offers certainty. There is an enemy. There is a mission. There is a way to be right in a way that peacetime morality can never provide. This is why societies on the brink of collapse so often turn to war, not just for survival, but for the intoxicating relief of finally knowing who they are. But if war is so deeply woven into the fabric of human psychology, does that mean we are doomed to repeat it forever? Or is there a way to redirect that energy, to transform the destructive impulse into something else? There is an ancient story told in many forms across cultures, the tale of the twin brothers, one who builds and one who destroys. In some traditions, they are gods, in others, mortal kings or even warring aspects of a single mind. The builder raises cities, plants forests, and writes laws. The destroyer burns them down, not out of malice, but because he understands something his brother does not. That stagnation is death. The builder clings to form, but the destroyer knows that only through chaos can new worlds emerge. This is the paradox of war encoded in myth. It is both end and beginning, murderer and midwife. Consider the phoenix, that mythical bird that must be consumed by flames to be reborn. Civilizations, too, follow this cycle. The Roman Empire did not fall because it grew weak. It fell because it could no longer renew itself. Its borders hardened, its institutions calcified, and when the Goths came, they were not just invaders but the unconscious answer to Rome's silent plea for transformation. History is littered with such examples. Societies that could not adapt peacefully were forced to adapt violently. War, in this light, is not mere savagery but evolution's ruthless hand. Then there is the deeper, more unsettling allegory, the scapegoat. In every conflict, there is a moment when a people, trembling under the weight of their own contradictions, unite by projecting their sins onto another. The enemy becomes the vessel for everything they fear in themselves. This is why war is so intoxicating. It offers absolution. The soldier who kills does not feel like a murderer. He feels like a redeemer. The crowd that cheers for battle is not bloodthirsty. It is desperate to believe that evil lives out there, not within. But the oldest and most universal symbol of all is the serpent eating its own tail. War feeds on itself. Each victory plants the seeds of the next conflict, because the vanquished do not disappear, they remember. The Treaty of Versailles sowed the fields of World War II. The conquests of empires become the rebellions of future generations. There is no clean end, only the wheel turning. And yet, this very cycle hints at a terrible truth, that war is not an interruption of human progress, but one of its engines. Do these stories condemn us, or do they offer a key? If war is a force as natural as fire, then the question is not how to extinguish it, but how to wield it, or better yet, how to transmute it. The battlefield is not confined to trenches and borders. It lives in the way nations memorialize their past, in the stories we tell our children about heroes and enemies, in the subtle ways we justify small cruelties in the name of greater goods. To understand war is to recognize these patterns in our daily lives. The office rivalries framed as honorable competition, the political discourse that frames compromise as surrender, the cultural narratives that equate peace with weakness. The first step toward integration is seeing clearly how the psychology of war permeates everything, from geopolitics to our private resentments. Consider how conflict resolution so often fails because we approach it as a problem to be solved rather than a human impulse to be understood. Diplomacy falters when it addresses only territory and resources while ignoring the deeper hungers, for dignity, for recognition, for a story that makes suffering meaningful. The most lasting peace treaties are those that give former enemies new roles in each other's narratives, as South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission demonstrated. This is the practical alchemy, transforming the energy of conflict into structures that allow for honor without annihilation, for identity without dehumanization of the other. On a societal level, we might cultivate what the ancient Greeks called agon, the sacred rivalry that channels competitive energy into art, sport, and philosophy rather than destruction. Modern equivalents exist in scientific innovation, economic competition, even space exploration. Arenas where humanity's drive to conquer can be directed toward frontiers that don't require human suffering. Yet these alternatives only work when they satisfy the same psychological needs as war. The need for purpose, for testing one's limits, for belonging to something greater than oneself. The personal transformation begins when we recognize the warrior within, not to indulge it, but to converse with it. That part of you that wants to fight, to prove, to dominate, what is it truly seeking? Security? Respect? Freedom? The same questions apply to nations. The veteran who finds purpose in rebuilding rather than destroying, the activist who channels rage into creation rather than hatred, the leader who understands that true strength sometimes looks like restraint. These are the alchemists who transform war's base metal into something finer. We stand at a crossroads unique in history. For the first time, our weapons threaten not just cities but civilization itself. The old patterns that once renewed societies through conflict now risk irreversible devastation. This is the evolutionary pressure that may finally force us to grow beyond war. Not because we've become morally superior, but because we've run out of room for the old cycles. The psychology that once served our survival must now adapt to serve our thriving. The call is not to utopian pacifism, but to conscious evolution, to build institutions and personal practices that honor the human needs war once met, while finding nobler expressions for those impulses. It begins with you, in how you engage with every minor conflict in your life. Will you demonize or understand? Seek victory or transformation? The microcosm reflects the macrocosm. We end where we began, with choice. The masks of goodness and aggression are both prisons when worn unconsciously. But when we face the full complexity of our nature, our capacity for both creation and destruction, we find the power to write new stories. War has been humanity's shadow companion for millennia. The question now is whether we can walk into the light without forgetting the lessons the dark has taught us.